So for dimensions on this here book, we're looking at 4 and 5/16 inches wide. We're looking at about, let's line that up, about a 7 and 1/16 inches long. And then like thickness, can we get a good thickness reading? We're looking at about 5/16 of an inch, maybe 6/16, between 5 and 6/16. I guess I do that like 11-30 seconds or so. So I just finished reading this book, Adolphe, this morning. 85 cents back when it was printed. I haven't been able to find copies like this, the Penguin Classic Black Spine mass market online for very cheap or really anywhere. Typically it's one of those ones with like white band, and I assume those may, sometimes those aren't really always bound as nice. I put some hearts in here. She was deeply religious because religion sternly condemned her way of life. That reminded me of Graham Greene. And truly, The End of the Affair is the book I thought of most while reading this one. This one is also a study of like guilt and I guess weakness as perceived by the person who like thinks they're being weak. This one also has to do with a kind of religion being formed out of relationship to like a religiousness being created, a genuine religiousness, because they perceive religion as like condemning their way of life or even them materially. Just like the physical details on this book were very good. It's small and it's one of those like old mass markets, but I think it's got some stitching in there. It really folds out nicely and it just was really a pleasure to read. The color on the pages was like not too yellowed, but it didn't look too fresh, Somebody had put notes in there before, but they were pretty considerate. What the person who had this before me did a lot of the time, let me try to find an example, was to put these kind of like brackets where they would put little diagonals at the start and the end of a paragraph to signal that they liked it or something. I think the person who read this before was probably reading it for a class maybe and not for pleasure, I assume. I mean, I read these kinds of things for pleasure just because I'm a sicko. After I finished reading it, I thought that I've Got to Match Your Embrace and My Collapse was a good song to accompany the book. And then the album kept on and I said, of course, They'll Need a Crane is very appropriate. And then like when Shoehorn with Teeth came on, I was like, is that appropriate? I guess Where Your Eyes Don't Go is appropriate to the level of just analysis that goes on here. The like forensic, the dissection of a person's own folly. Back to physical details for a second. How many pages we working with here? Like 120? 123? This one is a printing from about 1964. You wouldn't think it for how like well preserved this copy was. I think I got this in Knoxville at McKay's. I've recently been thinking about Knoxville, planning Knoxville trips, and I've been thinking about McKay's because I've been trying to learn a little bit about prose poems from reading Kinder Totenwald again, and I've been meaning to get to Tarantula, and this is the copy I got from McKay's for 25 cents. But yeah, I mean, it's just a real dissection, and it's kind of an unpleasant book in several ways. And in the intensity of its searching and self-laceration, recalled Notes from Underground to an extent. Crime and Punishment, of course, I just recently read, and it was another kind of quasi-unpleasant experience. Like, there are painful things about it. I think that there was like a little more lucidity to this that felt very modern. So to that end, I kind of thought about this book a little bit. The ways in which this is really, like the ways this is pleasant are also kind of the ways it's unpleasant. And then I also got kind of a poetiness from the kind of torturedness, although it's not as artistic as here. This feels more philosophical and just like a piece of work. This is art, and this is meant to like really move you and kind of not just make you think, but make you wonder, I assume. I should really reread some Poe. It's been a while since I have. I put this here. This might be something to reread, kind of inspired by Adolphe. I remember this having a similar kind of ruthlessness and talking about how a relationship goes south. And then I was also thinking about this one because this is the last book I remember being like, man, what's going on in this book is really unpleasant, besides, of course, Crime and Punishment. but it's such a beautiful, admirable piece of writing. My impression that this was an admirable piece of writing began sort of toward the beginning. There are these two prefaces, in addition to the introduction, which I'll also talk about, that are pretty good. The prefaces really give you a clue as to the entire plot. This isn't really like a book to read for the plot. Of course, the introduction also spoils the plot of the book. The introduction also says some really crass stuff about how women always are that will irk you if you choose to read it. So go ahead and skip that introduction if you're looking at the L.W. Teacock, the L.W. Tancock copy of this book. But as soon as the actual book starts, you get this really disarming description of how this person is kind of flawed and how they were like treating their understanding father badly or whatever. And if that's unpleasant to you to read, then you may not enjoy the book. If that's pleasant to you because you recognize in it like a kind of admirable self-consciousness that you want to like cultivate maybe, then you will enjoy this book. And I feel like that kind of sums up my reaction to it. There are some quotes in here that I think I would like to start a commonplace book. If anybody has a commonplace book, please let me know how that looks. This is kind of a commonplace book. I have been thinking about doing some commonplacing in just a memo book like this, tearing out the pages where I was doing work notes, trying to learn React, and just do some commonplacing in a memo book. Some of the gems you underline are a little arguable, or you hope they're arguable. I feel like that happens a lot with this book. Here's an example. There are things which are not said for a very long time, but once they are said, they are constantly repeated. Of course, that's a big generalization, and it feels true when you encounter it. And a lot of times, statements like this, you can feel a little bit kind of called out by, and it will make you want to dispute those sentences. And I feel like that dissonance is kind of part of the pleasure of reading the book, surmounting that dissonance. So here's another example of those fat brackets that came with me. What miserable ambiguities, what torturous language. I deplored its obscurity, but dreaded making it any clearer. This kind of self-consciousness is totally what's so good about this book. I also thought this would be a good epigraph for a poem book. I think this book maybe deplores its clarity, but dreads making things any obscurer. Of course, that sounds like I'm saying nothing, but whatever. This sentence really vexed me. Not for me the consolation of telling myself that by dint of sacrificing my whole life, I have succeeded in inspiring an attachment worthy of me. That just seemed like a piece of almost pure poetry. But, and the brutality and beauty of the expressions continues. As misers conjure up in the treasures they have amassed all the goods those treasures could buy, so I saw in Eleanor deprivation of all the successes I might have expected. This book is also, I'm really glad I'm making a video of it just because I hadn't heard of Benjamin Constant before. Constant, I don't know how to say it in French, but Benjamin Constant before. I hadn't heard of him before. Hadn't heard of this book, you know. I love small books. I love the way this crackler looks on the cover, right? Like, such a good look. Yeah, I basically got this on grounds of its like size and its obscurity, and it looked inviting but also kind of mysterious. And I am pleased to report that it is worthwhile to read this thing. I think that if you like any sort of searching, kind of unflinching prose, then you're going to really appreciate some of the work that's done here. I think some of the hackneyed elements of the plot, and I think some of the predictability of it, especially if you have everything spoiled to you by the beginning, is going to wear on you. And maybe some of the repetitive aspects of the self-exculpation are going to wear. I mean, it's not like a perfect pleasure read, but I was shocked at how much I enjoyed this book, because I expected to enjoy it just maybe a medium amount. At worst, expected to just have to grit my teeth and get through it. Anyway, that's a little look at this book and what it reminded me of and some of the pleasure of reading it. Should you choose to get to it, let me know what you think. Should you choose not to get to it, you can be forgiven. It's not really like, it's not the most essential thing, but it's a cul-de-sac that, or it's a little lane that I think we should make a little note of.